Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So my respects to the Venerable Sangha and to all of you gathered here. It's this. I've been in Malaysia now. This is my first time here as a monk. I was here about 30 years ago with my wife and son. We were living in Asia for about a year, travelling around, and did spend some time in Malaysia, but coming here as a monk, I've been here just over a week now, and travelled up to Ipoh and stayed there for a little bit in Taiping, having a look at some of the different Buddhist centres. There's a couple of monasteries I visited and have felt incredibly welcome. Very appreciative of the hospitality, the warm welcome that I've received pretty much everywhere I've gone, and very impressed with the standard of meditation practice, the interest that people have. There's certainly no doubting the devotional quality, people's enthusiasm for the tradition, but it's been very nice visiting these centres to see people's interest in the practice, actually giving time to meditation. This is so theory and practice, one without the other. I mean, they work together so well, but I do see in different places where an overemphasis on the theory, but my general experience in Malaysia has been tremendous enthusiasm for actually practicing meditation, putting the theory into practice. So I'll be here for a few more days and then back to Canada. It's -5 degrees there at the moment. So I'll be taking some of the warmth from Malaysia back to Canada. We have a 3-month retreat, monastic retreat coming up there, so I'm really looking forward to that. I thought I'd talk a bit this afternoon, the gift of community, which actually includes two concepts really, the sense of the gift, the giving, generosity, dana parami, and community. And one of my general reflections is to see the similarity between terminology. We use different words to describe different aspects of experience. This teaching given to us by the Buddha, it's very much about human experience. It's not a cosmological kind of universal explain everything kind of teaching. It's about you, it's about me, it's about your suffering, it's about my suffering and the way leading to the end of suffering. So we use these different terms to explain our experience. I mean, what's the difference between sadness and unhappiness? Two different terms, and there is a nuance there, but in terms of discomfort of the heart. So these two terms, the gift of community, they're almost so maybe presented as a hyphenated term, that community is a gift and giving is a very powerful aspect of community. I've always had an interest and an increasing understanding and deepening love of community. Initially I didn't understand community, I was kind of drawn towards it. I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 1952, so I was in my youthful prime, I guess, in the 70s when the whole hippie thing was happening. So I took to that with great delight, grew my hair, got involved in all sorts of unsavoury activities. Lots of fun and excitement, but not much wisdom. Lots of suffering. But one of the things that did really interest me about that time was the movement towards the commune was probably one of the more visible aspects of that period. Getting back to nature, and I did indeed in the 70s. I bought a piece of land on an island and co-founded a commune. A group of us with long hair and unsavoury habits got together on this land. We didn't have a clue what we were doing. The idea was that being close to nature was a way of being at peace and being happy, and that still idea, as I say, coming to understand the nature of community, the nature of my own mind, really. Interestingly enough, that community still exists. It's changed considerably as we've all got older and wiser. I'm not so involved now. But the possibility that we have to be able to live together. I mean, it's like we have no choice, really. Community is almost a given in human society. Very few people live truly alone. In fact, very few people are actually capable of living alone. People quite like the idea of getting away from it. We have that, people come to the monastery. I'm currently in Canada. I've been at Tisarana for 5 years now. I've seen it there and at other monasteries. People come with this idea to get away from it, the stress and the confusion and difficulties in their general community situation, and they think coming to a monastery that they can be on their own, be at peace. And even in a retreat situation, when people are left on their own, what they're left with is themselves. And for many people, that's quite difficult. For some people coming to the monastery, it's the first time in their life that they've ever taken the time to stop. And in that, well, because there's no alternative, there's no television, there's no radio, there's no entertainments. We discourage the use of computers and all of those kinds of things. There's only the one meal a day. You take all those things away, what you're left with is your own mind, your own heart. And for many people, this appears as a very uncomfortable place to be. The idea of getting away and being peaceful, but when actually confronted with the space, the possibility of peace, that it's not always such an easy thing to do. So we tend to congregate in groups, and we generally tend to congregate in groups of people that we actually like. It's another aspect of monastic life. You don't set it up. The choices of who lives in the community is not based on who you like. As the senior monk at Tisarana, people coming into the monastery, it's their commitment to practice. It's their willingness to abide by the precepts. It's their willingness to fit in with the standards and the rules of the community. Their love of Dhamma is probably the most important factor, to actually have this love of Dhamma. Whether they're a bit eccentric, I never met Jerry, but I've certainly heard stories about him. And you do get all sorts of different characters, so many different personalities. In some ways you can think, I mean, just becoming a monk is a stepping outside of the norm, a move away from the traditional or the average centre, so monks are by definition eccentric. and we're all eccentric in slightly different ways. But the willingness to surrender to the standard of the monastery, and Thai talk about core what, it's not necessarily the Vinaya. There's the 227 rules we have and the general Vinaya standards. They're maintained. Usually that's not a problem. But each monastery has a particular style, often determined by the personality of the senior monk. So the necessity to be able to, in a monastic community, to be able to surrender to the conditions that one encounters. They're obviously very moral. Generally they're very compassionate, kind, generous. These factors are usually encountered in most monasteries in a very heartfelt way. So when the mind tends towards complaining, picking on things that I don't like, this practice of being able to surrender, and this really, as I extended my interest in community, this is really what I saw I had to learn, what I had to understand. So the monastic tradition, it has a very strong hierarchy. So Ajahn Sumedho in this group here, he's the most senior monk. And then, we all get lined up and we go for the food and the order. And if two monks are of the same year, you ask which months did they ordain. So it makes it actually very simple. And it also supports a real gracefulness, a real beauty, being able to, because I've been travelling quite a bit of late, last couple of months. Coming here, it's so nice actually to be junior. I can be down the end of the line, and I've got lots of monks that I can bow to and help and carry their bag and put their sitting cloth down. All these very simple things, but very beautiful things, actually very significant things. It's the small things that do add up. So I made many different experiments in community, shared housing, rural and urban. And I was very fortunate. I was travelling with my wife and son to Asia, and we ran out of money in West Australia. And I was very fortunate to meet Ajahn Jagaro, who was the senior monk there at the time. This was before they bought the monastery land. They were still living in the city. And my memory is, and I have no idea how it happened, I looked up B for Buddhist in the telephone book. That's my memory. I have no idea what prompted me. And Ajahn Jagaro answered the phone and invited me to come around and for a cup of tea and a chat, and I did. And it wasn't too long after that Lumpur Sumedho came and led a 10-day meditation retreat, and that was very pivotal in my monastic life. Unfortunately, I was very distracted with, self-indulgence basically, when Lumpur Cha was actively teaching. Theoretically, I had the opportunity to meet him, but I never did. I guess the closest that I came, I was fortunate enough to be present at his funeral in Thailand, in Wat Ba Pong. I had, from my trip in Asia, I'd gone back to New Zealand, and cutting the story short, I went to the monastery in New Zealand where Ajahn Viradhammo was the abbot there. So very fortunate to meet him, have him as my preceptor and teacher, and we've known each other about 25 years, so he's become a very good friend. I'm very grateful to, in terms of this development of community, the people that I live with, the people that I share my life with. And of course, as Ajahn was saying, where we set up our associations, whether they be physical or mental, that's what we're going to awaken to. That's what's going to be influential in our lives. That's where insights are going to arise. So for me, going to New Zealand and being with Ajahn Viradhammo for the first few years of my monastic life, I'm very fortunate. So I was 1 year a monk, I think, when the funeral. Interesting timing, because Luang Por Chah's 20th anniversary is also my 20th anniversary. 20th anniversary of Luang Por Chah's death, but the 20th anniversary of my birth as a monk. So it's kind of has a fairly poignant sort of personal aspect to it. So going to the funeral, which was a year after Luang Por Chah's death, I had been a monk for exactly 1 year. And I didn't know anything. I mean, training in the West, it was a Thai forest monastery, and Ajahn Viradhammo had trained in Thailand, so that was the standard of training. But there's an awful lot that you really need to be directly exposed to. That process of association is how we learn, and being in New Zealand, far removed from the finer points of training in Thailand. So it was a real eye-opener for me. It was actually an intense. Flying from New Zealand to Bangkok, I mean, that trip was enough. No sooner had we got to Bangkok than we were on a bus to Ubon, which is about 6, 8, 10 hours or something, I don't know, a long time. No sooner had we got to Ubon than we were bundled in the back of a pickup to go off to Wat Pah to pay respects at the monastery there. Then it was back to Wat Pah Nanachat, got about 2 hours sleep, I think, and then it was back to Wat Pah for the beginning of there was a week of ceremonies there. Fortunately, I was a bit younger than I am now, so my body, I ordained at 40, so I must have been 41 at that time, just sitting on a concrete floor. Now I need all kinds of cushions and props to support. But there was an incredibly beautiful, deep and profound energy during that week. I mean, it's difficult, just to guess how many people in this room right now, but estimates for the week of the funeral that there were 500,000 people that came to the monastery to pay their respects to Luang Por Chah before his cremation. And on the actual day of the cremation, there were 200,000 people. And being in an environment like that, I remember a monastic procession. There's a photo that's been quite widely reproduced of the Sangha approaching the Chedi. I don't know, 200 monks, 300 monks. I mean, I was down the back somewhere, I'm sure. But being a part of that, surrounded by just so many people, the mass of humanity. It's like being in, London, I guess is one of the biggest cities I've been in. The mass of humanity. Being in that situation, a place like London, actually brings up a sense of anxiety for me. Have I got my ticket? Am I going to get on the right train? Is somebody going to rob me? Am I going to get mugged? You know, the way that the mind quite naturally goes in a place of uncertainty. And at this time at Wat Pah, just this incredible, like a wave, this radiating energy of gratitude, generosity, just feeding so many people. I forget the meals, like for 10,000 people. Just the logistics that's gone on to organise this is extensive. I mean, I've been involved with a few of the people helping out, a lot to do. You imagine feeding 10,000 people. Everything for free, volunteers, it was so well run. So one could just truly relax, truly one's heart could open to that situation, being with the people who had known Luang Por Chah for many, many years, people like myself who were quite new. One of the things that very early on once I met Ajahn Jagaro in Australia and started developing my interest in this tradition, one of the things that really made a connection with Luang Por Chah was the books. Taste of Freedom was one of the early ones I remember. And to this day I still wonder how did that work? Somehow he used to speak kind of Thai Lao dialect, so it's a translation from Thai into English, and then another translation of medium from the spoken word into the written word to be read. And for me, somehow, I could hear Luang Por Chah speaking. I imagine that, of course, but there was something about the quality, the simplicity, the directness, the wisdom of those teachings that somehow was able to carry through that sort of double translation. Like when they make a movie of the book, you know, this amazing book bestseller, and then they make a movie. It's never quite the same, or rarely is it the same. With Luang Por Chah's teaching, consistently that used to come through. I was particularly inspired. I'd give those books, copies of those books, to my friends who were not Buddhist, and they would similarly recognise, they'd appreciate the value. I don't know of any of them that actually took up meditation or anything on account, but having read the book, they, you know, and I'd asked them, you know, did you enjoy it? And they appreciated the truths, the wisdom that was there. I was sitting this morning just reflecting on, actually thinking about this very moment and what I might say. And the thing I kept coming back to was the smile. Luang Por Chah makes me smile. I was just sitting on my bed with my cushions propped up, but meditating, just thinking about my association with this great man, with the lineage, with the community. I lived with Luang Por Sumedho for 6 years, and I've known many of the other senior monks, spent varying periods of time with them. So Luang Por Chah is the key that has really unlocked or opened this particular path. And I just sit there thinking about him, and I couldn't help smiling. Even looking at this photo, I'm not sure whether he's looking stern or whether there's a little secret smile there. It's a beautiful image. There's something about that, like looking traditionally at a Buddha Rupa. Often the face of a Buddha Rupa, usually very, very serene, often just the slightest of smiles. There's something about that experience, or what it represents, a physical manifestation of an inner experience. So the funeral itself was quite amazing. The King and Queen of Thailand came, and they lit a ceremonial flame, which was then used in the evening. The cremation was very late at night, the actual starting of the cremation fire. And most of the lay people had gone home. It was probably 11 o'clock at night or something. It was quite late. And so the chedi, the stupa, inside which was the cremation oven, was filled with monks. There must have been, 300 monks, 200-300 monks. It certainly was packed with monks. And the fire was lit, and we were all chanting. And it's another one of those things that really brings a smile. The official story is that the cremation oven was under-engineered. So we're sitting there, all facing the oven, and it was covered with wax decorations, very beautiful, delicate artwork on this thing. But as we're sitting there, slowly, all these start dribbling, melting and running. You could hear this boom, pop, boom. almost like Ajahn Chah's inside there, kicking around. It was, I mean, nobody really knew what was going on at this stage, but apparently the oven was built in different layers and had been under-engineered, and the steel plates, the welding was cracking, so the fire was basically coming out. And then the room started to fill with smoke. And then, of course, all very mindfully and carefully, we made our way out of the jetty, and we're all standing around this smoke pouring out of the... Because the spire of the jetty was like the chimney of the cremation oven. So there's smoke coming out the 4 entrances, smoke coming out the chimney. Next minute, the fire brigade arrives. I just thought, is this Luang Por Chah having some kind of a joke or what? Having a fire engine come to put the fire out at a cremation, you know, it doesn't. So one of my lasting memories of that, because that was, as I say, that's probably my strongest point of connection or direct association with Luang Por Chah. And because I was quite junior, I was one of the last ones to leave in terms of transport being organised. All the senior monks got taken back to Wapananachat and so forth very early on. So it was just a small group of us remaining. I was circumambulating the stupa. And it was interesting just watching this opening to the memory of the community, this assembly of, say, 200,000 people that not so many hours before had been gathered around the Chedi, this enormous mass of devotees, this devotion, this love of Luang Por Chah. I could stand under the starry sky. I remember it was a clear night. And it's like I could just shifting attention through memory to that connection, that engagement with community. And then I could shift back to the relative solitude. There was only like 6 of us left. I was basically on my own walking around under the stars and the empty Chedi. And the coming and going of community, where was the community? Had the community all gone home and gone to bed? Or was the community still very much alive? Where was Luang Por Chah? This relationship that we have, I mean, community, both individual, I mean, how many people does it take to make a community? And just, you know, people gather and you look around and say, is the community here? Oh, well, you know, you maybe think few people are missing or some extras, or the sense of community is not something that can really be too sharply defined. Monastic community, even that, the sense of Sangha, who is part of the forest tradition, or is it the forest tradition, or is it the Thai forest tradition, or is it the Wat Pah Pong tradition, is it the Amaravati tradition? Where does this kind of grouping, this body of monks, where does it start and where does it end? Community is a very fluid thing. And what really makes the strongest definition for me is the heart connection. When I meet a monk and you ask, you know, how many vasa, where have you been living, a few questions, and it doesn't take too, you get a sense of, this is somebody who's part of my community. This is somebody who I feel I can include in my monastic life. Because you do, there are all kinds of monks around, and sometimes I meet monks and I'm not so sure. Would I invite them home? And this is something that it is difficult to define. I mean, just this experience of love that we experience as individuals. Community has that as a factor, and this is one of the other people have spoken before me about the love that Lumpur Cha was able to generate, to awaken within people. And we all have that capacity, of course. Certainly it's easier with the people that we like, the ones that have similar personalities or enjoy the same kind of food or keep the same kind of hours or whatever. It's easy to love little children and puppy dogs. I couldn't help noticing on the Bindabat, one of the little girls, she's maybe 3 or something, hard to say, she had on a t-shirt, "Total Charm." I thought, yeah. Little kids and puppy dogs, so charming, so lovable. It's easy. Older people, as we get more set in our ways, this inability to surrender. I'm saying the community, whether it's monastic community, lay community, whether it's family as community, this sense of surrender. Being able to be with, to be tolerant, to be patient with, all these different qualities that we are all able to develop. And a community like this is an expression of that. Usually within any community there's, people who don't get along, but generally when you sense the spirit of a community being part of a spiritual community, how beautiful that is. One of my most, profound connections or understandings or gateways or portals into community was a walk I did in Thailand. I walked in the southern part from Chai up to Kanchanaburi. It's about 600 or 700 kilometres. And it was the hot season, so I was walking a lot at night. I'd start walking at 2 or 3 in the morning and then go on arms round and then usually find a quiet place to practice. So I didn't have a lot of contact with people. I don't speak Thai. I didn't have a map. I can't read Thai. Because I was walking at night, I didn't see many people through the day. I was also quite junior. So I wasn't even 100% sure what I was doing, this whole idea of going on Tudong, going walkabout. I started out with from Ajahn Buddhadasa's monastery in Chaya, in Suratani. And there was one young Thai monk who was very inspired with my ambition, with my vision to walk. At that stage I was going to walk to Bangkok. And he wanted to come with me. And he spoke a little bit of English, and I thought, oh, that'll be good. he'll be able to, show me the ropes and help me out. Anyway, his inspiration was not matched by his physical condition. So after a day of walking in the hot season, and I used to have quite strong feet, so I was walking barefoot. That's quite traditional for Tudong monks. This other young chap, his feet were not very strong, so after a day of walking in the heat, he was getting quite bad blisters on his feet. And cutting the story short, we got invited for a drink one sort of late afternoon. And it was very pleasant sitting there having a cold drink, and the air conditioning was on. And next minute he turns to me and said, well, the train will be leaving in half an hour. He said, yes, these people bought us a ticket to Bangkok. I said, no. I'm walking. Anyway, it became one of those awkward social moments, and he basically intimidated me that by sort of saying, well, I couldn't offend the generosity of these people. So anyway, I thought, well, I'll get to the train station and I'll just, when nobody's watching, I'll just... No, these people, as is often the case with the devotees, they took us in, found us a seat, waited right up until the train was about to leave, so I'm sitting on the train. Anyway, I trying to talk to this monk, and he was convinced he had to go to Bangkok by train. So first stop, it was just a local train, so it didn't take long. The train stopped and I got off, but it was quite late at night by this time. Had no idea where to go, what to do, which way was north, which way was south. I can't read the stars. There's kind of fear, anxiety, uncertainty, both about the culture, about the environment, snakes, all these sorts of stories that one hears. And one step at a time. This can only ever be the way, just one step at a time. So I found a bamboo grove and set up and got some sleep, and then the next morning I walked around in circles because the train station was not far from the town. I can't speak Thai, so I told a couple of people I was walking to Bangkok, and they said, "Oh no, we'll put you on a bus." How do I get to Bangkok? So they want to take me to the bus stay. Eventually some people gave me some bananas, I got some rice, I had something to eat, and I started walking. What really happened in that walk was the contact that I did have, and it was the way that the Buddha set it up, incredibly skillfully, this necessity for the relationship between the monastics and the lay community. I mean, we're all dependent. We are reliant on each other. But the Buddha deliberately set this up so that monks have to go on alms round. So I hadn't had much experience, but you know, you have the alms bowl and you just walk around, feeling very, very nervous. Some people put some food in my bowl and so forth. And at that stage, I mean, I'm still a very practical person, but at that stage I was a bit obsessively practical. And I grew up quite frugal. My parents grew up in the Depression, so there was always a sense of taking care and not wasting things, and food was particularly looked after in that way. So the idea of going on alms round, I'd look and I'd be this hungry and I needed this much food. So I'd be looking in my bowl and I'd say, "Oh, well, that's about enough. Okay, you can stop being generous now. It's enough. No more generosity." It felt so awkward. Something coming from up here that just didn't sit with something down here, and I didn't know quite what was going on there. So then I'd try and go off somewhere quiet, find a little piece of woodland or something and go and sit. And as often the case in the village, there's somebody sitting around, I spot the monk, and next minute there's 10 more people coming. More food. The practical, logical part just wasn't having a happy day. The emotional, kind of intuitive part just couldn't make sense of anything, trying to reconcile this. So this went on. I mean, of course I'm reflecting on it because it was a persistent fear. I knew there was something wrong. And I just saw it doesn't matter, actually. It really doesn't matter. What's this about? What's this relationship about? And okay, so practically I do have to eat. I need to get some food. But actually, what underlies that is this relationship, this spirit of giving and receiving, this dynamic of community. And in this instance, it's monk, monastic community and lay community. This kind of very, very beautiful relationship, like a dance. And I thought, well, actually the food really doesn't matter. And I think, well, what am I going to do with it? All this extra, if I get extra food. I said, stop thinking. So after a few days, my practice was to relax and just to meet people. That's it. Just connect with the community. As individuals, sometimes there'd be a group of people on the side of the road. When I found it just to trust in the goodness of that relationship, the beauty of that relationship, that the practical aspects would just take care of themselves. You know, that I had enough food, that I had a balanced diet, that I managed to find some way to deal with the surplus. Toilet paper, I mean, I'm walking all my... How much toilet paper can you use in a day? I get a big packet of toilet paper. That's sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I mean, the logical mind's trying to work out, what are these people thinking, giving me? Get given one of these big durians on a stalk, you know? Like a whole durian. Doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, really. The connection that takes place there is what really matters. It's the process. It's the dynamic. It's the giving and receiving, and both have to be there. In the beginning, there was plenty of giving, but I was a very poor receiver. I was kind of quite miserly. I'll say, oh, I'll have those ones. No, I don't want the... you know, kind of turn my nose up. Pickled grasshoppers, I got one time. I saw them go in the bowl and I thought, oh my goodness. I did make an effort it wasn't to my taste, but it didn't matter. I mean, I guess if it's considered a delicacy, thank you very much. How incredibly generous. That's great. And because there's so much, you know, there was always plenty to eat. Just going on Bindabat here, I don't know, 500-600 people lined up. This gift of community. Every spoonful of rice is a gift of community. Every grain of rice, this sense of a gift. And I remember when I first encountered this rice Bindabat, again, up here, stupid. Fill up the bowl, tip it out. Fill it up again, tip it out. Doesn't make sense. Why don't I just take this much rice and go home? No, that's not what it's about. So I end at the end of this magical circle, or was it a square? I'm not sure. Just feel like I've been in a sort of a nuclear reactor or something in the positive way, in terms of trying to think of an analogy for energy. The kind of the power of that, connecting with some people, offering a greeting, good morning, hello, sadhu, 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 just that kind of connection. One of the things that, and it's not always possible where there's so many people, but just this sense of the smile. As I say, when I think of Lumpur Cha, it makes me smile. When I remember the Bindabat this morning, I remember many occasions, it brings a smile. And that kind of in a smile, an enigmatic smile or a wry smile or something, it connects with a certain energy, and it allows us a certain contact, because it's not a very dynamic or active gesture. It's actually quite subtle, but we are very finely attuned to the quality of the smile. And I think it's cross-cultural. I think a Malaysian smile's the same as a Kiwi smile. At least that's how I read it. And the subtlety of it allows a contact, whether it be eye contact. You actually just quickly catch a person's eye. It's amazing how powerful that is. In that context, in that environment of giving and receiving, that beautiful gift of community. Communion, just the word, community, communion, holy communion. Union, with, com as a prefix, meaning with. Joining together, yoga, union, bonding. Not separate. That's what the ego tends to do. That's what I could see those times going on arms around and many other examples, some of which I'm embarrassed about. I get stuck up here. There's no union. There's me thinking about you. When it comes down to here, I'm not quite sure where to point. We tend to point at the heart centre, the centre of the chest, as the seat of emotion, of love, like Valentine's hearts and things like that. That connection, how beautiful that is. Because it isn't it breaks down that whole sense of selfishness. That, in a sense, what that's pointing to is the Buddha's teaching on anatta, on not self. That community is a vehicle for breaking down the sense of self. And I think generally in Asian society there's more sense of, a stronger sense of community. Western cultures tend to be more individualistic. I mean, that's the culture I grew up in, so it is something I've kind of had to work with. The idea that you don't owe anything, you're independent. You know, that you should find your own way in life, you should stand on your own 2 feet, you should be strong, especially men. You know, not weak, because weak people have to rely on other people. That's the kind of general message that I grew up with. New Zealand culture back at that time. Men were strong, never cried. You weren't allowed to cry or express any, you know, because that was another sign of weakness. But actually when you see the strength that comes through community, through the sense of surrender, the giving up of my own individual personal, what I want, how I want the monastery to be, how I want you to be, and to find it, because it's not we should all do it your way or you should all do it my way. This sense of participation and cooperation. Gotong royong bahasa, yeah. I studied woodcarving in Indonesia, so I learnt a bit of bahasa Indonesia. This sense of cooperation, participation, sense of working together. Participating means joining in, cooperating means establishing harmony. It means surrendering to the general mood of the group. Being willing to say, well, I don't agree with this, but actually we need to move on. We need to just get something done. So, okay, I don't agree with doing it this way, but I'll support that. I'll help, even though I don't like it. I'm willing to let go of my selfish preference and, you know, fit with the wishes of the group. One, just to finish, I'd like to, in terms of personal practice, just considering the difference between external and internal. So community, like all of us here, you see, this is an external object. It can be kind of quantified, and people can be given names, and it's like an external manifestation. What we have internally, actually, to think in terms of community, that this being is made up of various factors, elements, energies. Talk about the 5 khandhas, you know, the body, the feelings, perceptions, mental formations and consciousness. That's one way it's talked about. The 32 parts of the body. There are all sorts of different ways that this be, but it clearly is a composition on the conditioned level. In terms of my psychology, in terms of my way of thinking of the world, I have a collection of opinions, a range of views. I often like to think of each of these aspects as different characters. So I have a happy, kind of joyful character that lives here. I have a rather sad and doubtful, depressed character that lives here. I have an angry, these are aspects of my being that I don't necessarily personify them and give them names or anything like that. I mean, once you start getting into that stage, it's clinical schizophrenia. If you start believing you've got all these beings running your life. But as a reflection, just seeing there is a dynamic community made up of various elements. And can I bring that same principle of participation and cooperation? Can I incorporate that internally? You see, it's pretty obvious that it's a useful thing to develop externally, but just as a reflection, the usefulness of bringing that and applying that same principle internally. So when there is sadness, I mean, you think in the outer community or in your family or a friend, you've got a friend who's had a difficult situation, or death in the family, or some problem, and they're feeling very sad and upset. You think, in terms of external community, what do you do? How do you relate to them? Do you ignore them? Well, you can do that, because it's not always the easiest thing to be with somebody who's sad and depressed, and maybe quite negative and even a little bit angry. It's not always easy, but a good friend, especially a spiritual friend, a kalyanamitta, spiritual companion, to be able to go to that person and maybe just sit with them, maybe make them a cup of coffee, just talk to them, ask them questions, give them a hug, whatever. How do we do that? How do we do that here? Taking that same principle, how can I participate? The participation is engagement. How can I engage with or participate with certain energies? It needs to be dynamic. It's not a passive process. It is one of engagement. Listening to, opening to, cooperating with, not this controlling, demanding. I mean, that's the easiest way to deal with people, some kind of dictatorship. It often produces a culture of fear. You know, the boss is in charge and things are really well organised and run well, but actually people aren't necessarily happy. It might be efficient, we're coming from here, but how does it work down here? Sometimes less efficient organisations are actually more productive because they're happier. People have an interest, a love of their community. Can I love this community, this collection here? Can I find ways to allow them to express their opinions, their thoughts? I don't know who this mysterious I is, this kind of overseer, may not necessarily agree with some of the suggestions that come through the mind. You know, sometimes the mind, you hear a voice that just says, go do something. Then there's another voice that says, no, but that's against the precepts. That's not beautiful, that's not appropriate. There can be quite a strong energy saying, no, just do it. So trying to find that point of balance, that sense of cooperation, offering oneself the gift of community, offering oneself as a gift within community. This kind of internal and external, the way that, and this applies in many in terms of analogies or models, that the external environment that we live is actually replicated in different ways internally. And the principles that we would logically try and follow externally, the sense in trying to incorporate those internally. So I'll leave that there for now. Thank you for your attention. The gift of community.